Okay, so welcome again. Um, I think we are enough to start the conversation. So part one is about external characteristics of propaganda, and it consists of how many? Five different sections, which are the individual and the masses, total propaganda, continuity and duration of propaganda, organization of propaganda, and orthopraxy. Right. So before I nice French. Well, I studied French, brother Kareem, so thank you for that. Uh, yeah. So before I let you know what I have to say on the topic, I do invite somebody, whoever really, to share their thoughts on part one and what they found to be the most interesting bits. You can just unmute your microphone and go ahead, please.
I don't always want to be the first one to say something, so I'm just, waiting if someone wants to
You
speak.
are going to be the first one, actually. So, that's your destiny. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Kareem.
like I try to like kind of want to break the ice, but also don't want to push it. So I'm just always sitting here waiting. So I don't know.
Go for it.
Yeah,
Go for it.
I think like it was really interesting. Like first of all, for me, the realization that probably everything is propaganda to a certain degree, right? Like he uses it in kind of more wide sense than what most people do, right? Like as he said also about like the elections, right? This is the only time where we kind of think about propaganda, right? Or we think about it in terms of the Western propaganda, right? But according to his definitions and like the scope and the way it functions, you feel as if the propaganda is like some living organism, in the like that it's a part of the society essentially. You just have to somehow figure it out to be able to, not be influenced that much by it or something like that. So gave me a different view on it, right? So I felt that was pretty cool. And as I said, like that is this living thing, right? It keeps on, re-educating and keeps on functioning and keeps on like being there, right? It's not something that comes and goes, but it has to be this continuous effort and like everything, every medium of exchange just has to be like, or like medium of communication has to be, part of this whole apparatus or something. So yeah.
So I do have a question for you then. If it is something that permeates society and, it doesn't happen only during elections, what are some examples of it?
Like from my personal view, or
Yeah, like from your experience, for example.
well, for me, for example, that's like for us all, I guess it's most about the Western type of propaganda, right? Like this neoliberal, neo, democracy type of propaganda that's being pushed all around us, right? So that's something that I feel is pertinent to our world. And how he even mentioned, like in the comedies, right? Like it used to be with proletariat and, the workers being shown, and even in a comedy that it's like about the working class, and you can see it now, right? They have all these, trends, whatever, bi, gender neutral. They put it in everything, right? It's not just, in the news or just something, but it's in advertisements, it's in, the TV shows, the music, the videos, the movies, like everything is part of this, narrative, right? Free and liberal.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one.
Can I go next?
You don't have to ask for my sorry, it's totally
It just
fine. Go ahead, Salma.
okay. I'll just go by my outline and the notes that I've outlined. I couldn't help but read the introduction before the first chapter, and just to understand where he's coming from. And uh, so what I've gathered is that he's writing from within the context of the technological society, as in the modern context. where we have mass media. So that's where he's coming from. And and then the law of efficiency of propaganda essentially is enabled by technology. And he claims that the obstacles that he's found in his study of propaganda is that it's often regarded as evil, and told stories, and this skepticism and the dismissiveness of propaganda. And that's something that we need to factor in when we read the book, because it's just it just permeates society. It's an inevitability. It's almost like a I don't know, a science of existing as a society, as a community. Um, so I think when we are reading this, I think we have to bear this in mind. It's not something sinister uh, or necessarily evil, uh, and that the okay, and then going on to the and then going on to the characteristics of propaganda. Uh, it exists like in a kind of a sociological phenomena. So it's like it's almost organic. As long as you have a society, a community that is organized, this is inevitable part of living together as a community. And and then the other thing is that he talks about human nature and human condition. So I was wondering, like, when you hear the phrase human nature and the human condition, what comes to mind? Like, what because if you understand human nature and if you understand human condition, then you can embark on your propaganda program. So, but in reading this, what do we understand as human nature? Are we, like, by that, like, human nature meaning, are we good by nature, or are we just prone to evil by nature? I mean, that's what I hear. And then if you talk about the human condition, then what are we talking about here? The Are we always in a state of uh, helplessness, or are we in a state of happiness and joy and contentment? I don't know, like, when you address these two points about a society, how do read propaganda? When you go through the characteristic of propaganda, do you revert back to, oh, this is because the human nature is like that, or because the human condition is such? I guess I'm answering my own question, but yeah. Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, like, and then some of the points he raises, like how he identifies individuals and the masses, and how propaganda seizes, when simple conversations, simple dialogues begin, and then you wonder, okay, so what is modern propaganda according to Ellul then? And what I've gathered is that it's supposed to spark action towards um, the propagandists' desired response, right? So you develop learned attitudes, and so he ends the book with identifying those charting out what's needed for this to pan out, and it seems like a very elaborate work of art. It's both a science and an art, and it's really interesting. That's
Absolutely.
all.
Well, I do have a question for you, Selma. So,
Yeah.
when he speaks about, and this is something I also picked on, the human condition, or the human nature. I've read you know a chunk of Western literature, and they do seem to be affected by this Christian understanding, like, even if they're not Christian, of human nature being inherently evil, and that we are born with in sin, or with sin, however you want to call it. And I do believe, like, the author himself draws upon that sentiment, that we tend to gravitate towards evil, like, even if propaganda is not necessarily bad, that we use it for evil anyway, because it is in our nature, really. Like, would you view it like that, or do you have a different take on it?
I have a different take. First of all, I don't think we are inherently evil because it just starts from our origin, where Shaitan, when he tried to convince Adam alayhi salam to sin, to partake of the fruit, he what did he say? He said that I am but a sincere, you know, I'm sincerely advising you because I believe, in goodness for you. Like you have to, like a lot of us who sin, we try to rationalize our mistakes, and the evil is made to appear good to us, and I think human beings tend to, obviously we lie to ourselves because we ultimately want to be good and want to do good. And so we delude ourselves into believing that we are doing the right thing when we are actually sinning. So I really believe that, internally we all want to be good. We all are good, and I don't believe that. And so yeah, when you talk about, when you bring it up this way, and then I mean, I don't think Ellul himself considers propaganda as evil per se. I think he's very scientific about it in his presentation. He's just very matter of fact. I mean, maybe not scientific is not the right way to describe it. He's just matter of fact about, it is what it is. This is how it is. It's just how uh, things pan out. But if you want to, like, say for example, the example of spectator sports, where you have to, um, what did I write here? I'm sorry. To be effective, propaganda must constantly short circuit all thought and decision. This drives the crowd to, the stadiums, to cheer on a team that you don't know, people that you don't even personally know, but it drives the herds right into the stadiums. But is that an evil? Is that because we are evil and we're bad that we're like that? Or is it because, it's I don't see it as sinister and evil. I just see it as, how do I put this? Because I'm not someone into spectator sports. I am critical of it, but I wouldn't say it's evil. You understand what I mean?
Right. It is just of how we act in this world, how we tend to act, basically, right?
But I felt this is even his point. Like I didn't feel he put it in some
Mhm.
negative notion or like some negative light that we are like evil, or he's just like it is what it is, right?
Right. Yeah. Right. I saw your comment. Could you perhaps elaborate on that? Because I think it is very um, pertinent to what we're talking about here.
Yeah, exactly. Like the it's just part of human nature. Essentially, this like forming opinions, right? Being part of something, having this higher purpose, for example, like in the society, right? So when you belong to this part of this propaganda group, you don't feel left out, right? You don't feel like outside of the narrative, outside of the mainstream. Like it gives you some part that you are accepted, right? Like some feeling. This is what the human nature I think he's trying to target. Like he's talking about the human nature through which the propaganda is most effective, right? Like about the aspects of human nature that the propaganda plays on, right? Like psychologically, sociologically, like this aspect of it, in my opinion.
Right. So it isn't like an all-encompassing theory about the human condition. It is just about certain elements of the human nature. Right?
Yeah, related to the topic he's trying to address, right?
Okay. Okay. So that was one point, or a couple of points rather, from part one. Does anybody else have any other thoughts on this particular part that you found interesting, compelling?
Like I really like the sentence on page 9. It was like the most favorable moment to seize a man and influence him is when he's alone in the mess. This was like epic. Like I was, oh yeah, that's so true. Like they're trying to separate everyone, like you know, taking away all of these group links, right? Like religion is something that you can stand behind, right? As a group, now let's eliminate that. Race, now let's eliminate that. Everything is trying to be eliminated, so you essentially don't have any like collective identity. Just this propaganda is essentially the only identity that connects you to the others, right? So essentially, like, you feel that you belong to something, but in the end you feel also alone, right? Like when he's alone in the mess. Like, it's so good, this sentence. I think it describes the situation of a lot of people, right? Like,
Well, okay, I want you to give an example of that, because I think in pop culture we have plenty of those instances, like when they speak to us as individuals, but obviously we are numbers.
yeah, exactly. Everybody's feeling he's special, like that the communication is directed to him, right? And to his experience and to his like development, right? Like, essentially, oh man, this, it's really just for me, like I'm special, right? But essentially you are among like 100,000 others who feel the same things, right? Like,
Right, yeah. Absolutely. Okay, well, I do have a couple of notes, or excerpts that I've highlighted as well. I'd like to, just read one and perhaps get your thoughts on it. So on page, I believe 11, he says, "It is a matter of reaching and encircling the whole man and all men." Okay, human beings. I don't want to be sexist. Propaganda tries to surround man by all possible routes in the realm of feelings as well as ideas, by playing on his will or on his needs, through his conscious and his unconscious, as assailing him in both his private and his public life. I, for some reason, found this to be quite intriguing, because I believe we can actually see many examples in our modern society of this. Would anybody like to comment? How do you feel about this particular quote? You don't have to wait for me to call on you. You just have to unmute and speak. Okay. Okay. Jan, how do you feel about this? If you are with us, I don't know. Maybe you have something else to do.
Okay. This is I'm just reading the page. I missed the page number when you mentioned it.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, in this, because this is the objective. Basically, he's uh, providing the objectives of propaganda, and so you would have to create the pre-propaganda, which is like through education, through all these symbols that you are subtly acquainted with, and then as you are older, you are faced with an onslaught of propaganda, right? It has to be acting in a concerted. It's a concerted effort in propaganda, from the movies you watch to the books you read to the newspapers you read, and personalities you listen to. So basically, it's like a systematic, organized method of control, and then, which is why I feel that this is just, as I'm reading it, I just feel that, like, whenever there is uh, different groups of people or mass of people getting together to interact or live together, uh, this is an organic, inevitable development in managing society. You know,
Hmm.
uh, yeah, that's what I think. I mean, that's what I've gathered, and so you utilize every possible mechanism in ensuring that you meet this objective. So because we live in the modern technological world, so you utilize all means of media, mass media, and I think at the age of social media, it's kind of shaken the foundation of the fundamentals of propaganda. I think social media kind of shakes that, that it kind of, snaps the masses out of the hold that propaganda has, you know. So I don't know what to make of that. I mean, we're seeing today the clutches. I mean, like I mean, as Shahid has talked about, he's talking about how propaganda has failed. Uh, in the American context, the propagandists have basically failed to, because he talks about also. I may be skipping the sections here because he talks about propaganda also being in sync with reality, in your
Mhm.
outcomes, in your objectives. So if you're out of touch with reality in your propaganda, then it's just, okay, it's a failure, and you've failed to read the room, so to speak. You have not gathered enough to understand your own society, your own community, or your youth. In this case, in America, where all the students, the elites, are the children of the private capital owners are rising up against the very system that brought them about. So it's like a whoops, what now?
Mhm.
Because again, like we keep hearing of people talking about, we have our phones now. You can't hold us captive, or hypnotize us with your propaganda. So in this light, it seems like a sinister program, applied on people. And but propaganda can also be a means of negotiation, a means of averting violence and averting conflict. It can also go in that direction. I think it just depends on the person perpetuating the propaganda, I guess.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that's it for from me for now. I'll add if I have anything else. Circle ahead.
Yeah. On that note, Selma. So I do want to maybe uh, provide some additional thoughts on that, because like as you said, propaganda can be utilized for good purposes as well. I mean, I always go back to this example. We always think of education, for example, or higher education as a um, very noble human invention. Okay, but oftentimes the most educated and intelligent, men and women are monsters, right? So in the case of propaganda, I think it can be the same, really. Like you can reach like morally good outcomes if you utilize it well. The and the problem I have with the word propaganda is that I don't know how all of you feel about this, is that it has negative connotations, and I believe wrongfully in the minds of people it is about half truths, outright lies, spin, etc. But it doesn't have to be necessarily. So, like for example, in the case of a society which wants to spread certain values, uh, I mean, in the case of modern society, you do need that apparatus to kind of instill those values in people, um, which like you can't have a chaotic society. There needs to be some level of cohesion. But I suppose like, when we talk about propaganda, we always talk about the negative aspects of it rather than the positive. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. I went on for too long there. Would anybody else like to comment on this?
Well, Assalamu alaikum. Well,
Walaikum salam.
I think that it depends on the ethics or the morals and principles that one has for himself. Because if you look at it as if I think that I could pursue a certain goal and that I could make something look better than it actually is, and that I'm convinced that this is the right way to do it. I think that it is very personal and very individually individual, if a person pursues that path. What I think is that me personally, I wouldn't do it because, or at least if someone is trying to make Islam, for example, look better, or to actually influence the minds of the people, I would say it will be okay. But still, there is an element where you make something look better than it is, as I just said. And I think this is my approach would be that I would say I'm very critical of that for myself. Yes, that's about it.
Thank you. Thank you. So you're saying that like you personally on an individual level would be uncomfortable with that. But how do you feel about institutional propaganda? Because Ellul talks about that really. He doesn't talk about individual instances of it.
Well, I think fight the enemy with the tools that you're being fought with. So I think as a general approach, for governments like Muslim governments or institutions, I would say that this would be a it has to be done. So, but me personally, I wouldn't indulge in that. Yeah.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay, would anybody else like to chime in on this particular issue of propaganda encircling individual human beings in the society, right?
Jen wanted to speak.
Yeah, I think
Trinity, go ahead. Yeah. Oh, Jan. Okay, Jan, go ahead. Sorry.
no, I was actually responding to something before that, so I should probably just cut out.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I've just been thinking, and I was thinking while I was reading it, I think perhaps in the recent world, the most extreme example of propaganda was the pandemic, where overnight people just became rapidly. I don't know what it was like in other areas, but I was in the UK at the time, and the same thing happened in South Africa. Everyone just fell into line, and it didn't happen quietly. If you mentioned any doubt about what was going on and what came next with the injections, you were rounded on, viciously rounded on, totally attacked by the pack. It was for me, it was a very, very strange phenomenon. How they managed to get that much of a violent reaction. When did the propaganda start? How did it go? I found it most interesting. And there's a guy called Matthias Desmet, whom I'm sure most people have heard of by now, but he's a professor of clinical psychology at Ghent University in Belgium. He's actually written a book called Mass Formation, which I haven't read. But I've heard a lot about it, and I've heard him being interviewed where he describes this phenomenon. And I mean, because I haven't read the book, I don't have an answer. I don't know whether he's got an answer or something. But for me, what's happened in the past 3 years or so has been a vivid example of an almost immediately and total societal packing, for want of a better word.
I think, Jen, as you were, I mean, when you pointed out the pandemic, it mobilized people to it appears like the propaganda actually had us complying to the parameters set by the authorities on the on COVID. I mean, on the pandemic, right? But I think because he mentions also in Jacques Ellul, he talks about how propaganda, in order for propaganda to be fully successful, you also need to physically assert. It has to be authoritarian to a certain extent. So because the authoritarian element was coupled with the information, the propaganda on information, so you were able to make people comply with the intended purpose of the pandemic. But that means stay at home, everything, work from home, and everything going online and not going out and all of that. But I think the majority of the people didn't actually want to do that. I think a lot of people did not fall for that, the fear mongering that the pandemic intended. And I think it's just through this coercion that they complied. The compliance was attained through coercion, and it's also part of the propaganda model. I mean, that's what he talks about in the book. That you cannot have, there's direct incitement and indirect incitement in propaganda, and the authoritarian one is also, a reality.
Thanks for that.
On the issue of pre-propaganda, the author makes some very interesting claims, and I'll just read them out to you to see if we can perhaps expand on this a little bit. So he says, seen from this angle, pre-propaganda does not have a precise ideological objective. It has nothing to do with an opinion, an idea, a doctrine. It proceeds by psychological manipulations, by character modifications, by the creation of feelings or stereotypes useful when the time comes. It must be continuous, slow, imperceptible. Man must be penetrated in order to shape such tendencies. He must be made to live in a certain psychological climate. So, Jan, we talked about the COVID pandemic. What myths or what preconceived notions were there when the pandemic started, and I mean, how were they utilized by the authorities to impose the strict regulations and restrictions?
That's a good question. I'm not sure I know the answer. I've just been thinking about the pre-planning, the pre-propaganda. Does that start in our schools where we lump children of the same ages together and we get the we kind of coerce them into agreeing, otherwise they fall outside of the group?
I think that's one aspect. The pre-propaganda, that's a very early onset of pre-propaganda.
That would condition a response to authoritarianism.
I mean, to add on to Niall's question about the whole what laid the ground. I think because initially a lot of us were not very acquainted with what this thing that was going around. So public health, concern, because we have had pandemics before, and so we have like a mental, we're making the mental connection, right? So if it's spreading, it's dangerous, and obviously everybody values their life, so they would want to comply. But then as time goes by, you realize, you observe from data, from available information, from debates, from authorities in the medical field, and then you have reason, right? So you understand that, okay, maybe this is not as bad as it seems, because I'm also seeing for myself that it's not as bad as it is put out to be. And I think it was quite glaring for a lot of us. And the only reason why authorities were able to keep us in line is because there was this coercive element to it. Like, there are actual consequences if you fail to meet the demands of the protocols, I think that's what I wanted to say, why this was even possible, because of the coercive element of propaganda.
Perhaps also, as far as medical is concerned, the flu jabs every year at the onset of winter, they've been around for a long time. That's normalized the idea that people can stick needles into you for a respiratory or other, problem. Yeah, I think something to do with if it starts at school, then the whole herd instinct is reinforced for up to decades before it's actually put in, as you say, through authoritarianism, through coercion, put into place.
Jan, are you still there? I can't hear you.
Oh, sorry, no, I'm sorry, I thought I was finished.
Oh, okay, okay. My apologies. My apologies.
No problem.
So, okay, on this topic of pre-propaganda, we've seen how it can be, utilized in the case of the COVID pandemic. Are there any other like notable examples you can think of? And this is a question for all of you, really.
Well, uh, it is explained in the book of Edward Bernays in the beginning. They tried to, for example, they tried to get a certain brand or like a certain T-shirt or a certain clothing, and they tried to market it. And what they did was they took celebrities, and the celebrities wore those clothing brands, and all of a sudden everybody were trying to buy it, and they bought it, and it kind of um, boosted the sales. And that was like a technique, because everybody wants to be, or at least a modern human being wants to be like a celebrity, or they look up to celebrities. And the way to utilize it was to actually make the celebrities wear the stuff that they wanted to sell. So and then in modern times, it's the same thing. They just make it popular, and then everybody buys it. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's, I think, one of those aspects of propaganda that is meant to make you take action, right? To buy something. Like it is more. I think that is a later stage actually, rather than. I think pre-propaganda happens before that actually, right? But I think it is a good example really, because people do tend to follow celebrities and influencers and whatnot to um, do as they do, really.
To be honest, I just want to add something. I really like this notion, like where the propaganda doesn't try to like enforce some values that have to be identical with everyone, right? That is like somehow tailored in general, but speaks to everyone individually. But what is necessary is essentially the action to be the same, right? Like it doesn't matter why you do that action, but what is important is the result of the propaganda, right? Like they need this effectiveness of the propaganda. Like they don't care if for example, like people, businesses believe in neoliberal politics because yeah, the state will not intervene in my business. I will have smaller taxes. I can do evasion, whatever, right? Like everything is possible. And then some homo see it as, oh, finally I can be with the love of my life, right? Someone else sees it as, I don't know, I can have free education, whatever, right? Like the aspects that people find themselves within the realm of the propaganda might be different, but in the end the action is that you go in the direction where they want you to, right? Like based on different motivations, you reach to the same result, right? So this was a cool aspect. I saw him like mention it somehow, maybe indirectly, sometimes directly, but yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, that's as long as we reach the end goal, the end result, it doesn't matter how we get there, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly, and that's why everyone feels like special, or it's exactly that it's speaking to him, to his situation, right? Yeah, that's like a two-way relationship.
I mean, the section on continuity and the duration of propaganda. I mean, he points out that the success of propaganda is when it occupies every moment of the individual. Like it's delivered as a relay system of mechanisms, to keep up the continuum. That's you know that's an all-encompassing intrusion into my life by an external hand. It feels a little bit intrusive, but again, he's presenting it like it is what it is. I mean, if you just observe, it's a reality, but I can't help but feel that it's very encroaching.
Yeah, exactly. That was the point at the beginning. Like when I was saying that, you suddenly, after reading it, you feel that essentially we are all, part of it or something. Like there is this living organism living among us, right? Or so, as you said, it's intrusive, and you feel like, oh shit, am I subject to this as well?
There's also another section in the book where he points out. Okay, let's see. This is under the section organization of propaganda. Um, Okay, so this is a point I've already raised. No propaganda is possible unless it rests on psychological influence that is based on reality. So that's one. And if there's no physical influence by an organization to an individual, there's no propaganda. So basically, if there's no means of, I don't know, any coercive power, then there can be no successful propaganda. I don't know if Ellul is trying to say that it's one without the other. I'm not sure. It's like in the absence of, if you're not able to get people to comply, then therefore you must apply coercion. That's what I think he's trying to get to.
But
And then,
I would imagine,
yeah,
Selma, that the process of pre-propaganda is crucial there, because like if you dedicate so much time into propaganda, into what's the word, making people believe certain things, then you don't really need so much force anyway.
yes, I agree. That's true. Okay, again, continuing on to to an example that he cites, why a Western criticism of the United Arab Republic, it didn't, like when the when he cites, I think, Syria and Egypt. I mean, when there was the formation of the United Arab Republic, there was a lot of Western criticism, but it didn't move the Arab public. But Abdel Nasser's critique of the Iraqi election as a fraud that's like falsified by imperialists apparently had an effect and sparked some change. I mean, he's just citing this example. I have not had the time to look this up to understand in detail what actually took place. But he's trying to, in trying to explain how, you have to understand reality if you want to, apply propaganda. You
Yeah, I
can't
now
just,
kind of remember, like it was related to like what you were saying. I think well, he was trying to somehow distinguish, because he usually, like he said, when people make studies, right, that it's essentially just the psychological aspect of it, right? But he was trying to showcase that it's not just a psychological phenomenon, right? That it essentially uh, it's not just an orthodoxy but an orthopraxy, right, or something that right there, right? I'm not sure if I got it correctly, but I think that was an answer to what you were like asking indirectly.
Well, there's another thing that I'd like to speak about, which is I believe part of the pre-propaganda process. And he talks about, because he's French. He talks about how for an individual to believe in propaganda, certain images have to be presented to them. And then he says the spectator will be much more disposed to believe in the grandeur of France when he has seen a dozen films of French petroleum, railroads, or jetliners. I mean, today we see, let's say, in most American movies, we see, the rich people in New York, Los Angeles, we see comfort, peaceful neighborhoods, right? I mean, that's one of those most commonly depicted images of the US. And we see power, we see money, um, you know, um, probably Hollywood is the prime example of that. And, in France, obviously, we are flooded with images of the Eiffel Tower. Are there any examples that you can think of that relate to this particular phenomenon of uh, picking and choosing specifically, um, you know, good or grand images of a particular society to make people believe it is such?
Sorry, now can you phrase the question again? I don't think I caught the full
Sure. So
question.
are there any particular examples that you can think of in pop culture of a certain country using images, videos, all sorts of different multimedia to portray their country in a positive light, despite the the different reality that country is in?
I can think in a negative light with respect to like Gulf countries, right? It's kind of
Mhm.
contemporaneous issue. So yeah, like every Muslim country, no women rights, no this women in burqa, black hijab, and these images, right? Or a dude with an
Right.
AK, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's actually the opposite of what I was going for, but it works. It works. Absolutely. Yeah. Selma, would you like to add something as well?
I mean, I know there's something in there in my head, but it's just blanks for me. Like a country that's using propaganda. I mean, what comes off straight off is like this slogan, "Malaysia, truly Asia." If you are familiar with the tagline, if you think about, if you've seen the advertisement, like Malaysia's tourism board trying to promote Malaysia, if you looked at the advertisement, you would think that this is just some tropical haven. You won't see a sign of this being a Muslim country at all. And I'm not saying this as a criticism of Malaysia or of the tourism board, but it's just the utility of propaganda in trying to promote to a population whose interest is just sun, sea, fun, tropics, explore, have fun. All of these. So but you come and then you come to the country and then you realize that, oh, the women are not scantily dressed. There's musallas and people are praying, and there are you know restrictions on certain things. And I mean, like, you realize that, oh, this is actually a Muslim country. I don't get to do everything that I want, or I can't just do the things that I do in back home or whatever. So um, again, I mean, I'm exaggerating in many points, but the point here is the utility of propaganda. Yeah, I would even say this is, it's positive. I mean, it's not like they're being deceptive. It's not deceptive. It's propaganda, because you are pandering to a uh, population for whom the core identity of the country is not the motivation to come visit, right? So you want the tourist dollars to boost your economy. So you push what appeals to them, and so you use
Mhm.
these symbols and taglines and so on. So this comes to mind when you ask the question. But I'm sure there's other things that I can bring up. But obviously, it will always come when I'm going to bed, trying to sleep, and my brain goes, "Oh, I should have said this. I should have said that." Anyway, khalas, I'm
Okay.
done. I'm done.
Well, I hope you're not having regrets about these meetings, right? I mean, this is just a casual discussion, and whenever you think of something, Selma, you can always type in the chat, right? So you don't have to be
Yeah,
don't have to be
I didn't mean
stressed
to
about.
sound
Yeah,
so morose, but just I jest. Khalas, okay, I'm
sure.
done. I think that comes to mind when you ask the question. That's the first prime example that comes to mind.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. I mean, to be fair, it is part of the tourist package, right? So they sell a product, and I understand that. It's not really a big deal to me. Um, Anybody else would like to maybe chime in on this? The usage of images or media to portray their country in a certain manner where, we have a different reality. Jan, would you like to say something?
I was just going to comment that slogans and symbols, I think,
Hmm.
are important in the pre-propaganda, and it's a repetition of those that gets people ready for perhaps for the action.
Right.
And in South Africa, we used to have through the apartheid years, the slogan was the Swart Gevaar, which means black danger.
Wow.
And everybody understood what that meant. Well, I'm talking about amongst the whites. And that slogan just helped to perpetuate the system, didn't it? Because people were frightened into keeping the apartheid government going. So something like that, you just repeat it over and over. It's something that everybody recognizes, something that everybody can react to. Well, not everybody, but many. I don't know. That's just an
Yeah,
example,
that's a,
perhaps.
a very eerie example, to be honest. Looking back on it, right? Sure. There's one example that I often play in my head. Whoever watches American sports notices how heavily propagandized the spectators become. Because, like, if you are watching like an NFL final game or the NBA game, they have to sing the anthem of America. The flag is raised across the pitch or the arena. You have some members of the American military present there. Um, I even saw, I didn't know, I think that this was the NFL game where some helicopters were flying above the pitch with the American flag. And I keep thinking to myself, okay, I mean, this is what people in the Soviet Republic used to do. But when Americans talk about the Soviet Republic, they, talk about it as, and I mean, obviously it was a very closed system. Propaganda was obvious, but in the modern era, propaganda, they can see that, and they fail to realize it is propaganda. So I just can't understand really that society at all. It's almost a parody of what y- of what they say about themselves. You get what I'm saying? So yeah, that's one example I can think of a blatant propaganda. So, okay, so let's talk about the final section, which has to do with taking action. So I do have a quote ready about that, and I'm going to read it to you, and perhaps we can talk about it. So the author says the aim of modern propaganda is no longer to modify ideas, but to provoke action. It is no longer to change adherence to a doctrine, but to make the individual cling irrationally to a process of action. It is no longer to lead to a choice, but to loosen the reflexes. It is no longer to transform an opinion, but to arouse an active and mythical belief. So, quite a lot to unpack here. Would anybody like to comment on this?
Yeah, I mean, basically, there's another quote that I want to add on. He basically says, to be effective, propaganda must constantly short circuit all thought and decision. This is like this really, you must separate thought and action, so it becomes just impulse driven, and that's the effect of propaganda's, endurance. That's the key to enduring propaganda. And it starts at the pre-propaganda level, and then it leads to active propaganda. I mean, you sow the seeds of propaganda at the pre-propaganda level, I guess, in the schools, and you prep them, and then by the time they're adults, they just you know ready to execute, act on impulse.
Absolutely, yeah. This part about it is no longer necessary to form beliefs, or rather, um, making people believe into a doctrine. We saw how unsuccessful ultimately it was in the Soviet Russia, in the Soviet Republic, because as soon as they lost the grip on those societies, as soon as they lost institutional power, many people stopped believing in those ideas. And I guess um, the makers of propaganda, right? They realize that, and they just want people to behave in a certain way. So you can, I mean, in the example, I've talked about, like, you can be a Muslim living in the West, and you can believe in whatever you want, but we still want you to be at that game, to buy those sneakers, to participate in elections, and to behave as we want you to behave. Right. I mean, that's one example I can think of, that illustrates this idea. But okay, maybe there are some other ones we could also discuss.
Yeah, well, to be honest, like I think I already spoke to this exactly. Like it doesn't matter what your doctrine is, or what your philosophical stance or whatever, right? Where are you coming from? But essentially, what we need is the action, right? And the best way possible to reach that action, right? Like the ends justify the means, right? Kind of approach.
Right, exactly. Like you can have a hardcore, socialist, living in a capitalist society, and you can talk about negatively about the system, but as long as you participate in it and you do what is expected of you, you're being tolerated.
Yeah, and that was sorry, just because I
Go ahead, yeah,
remembered.
sure.
Yeah, there was this cool idea where he was like, there is this multifaceted approach of propaganda that essentially like they try to convince you apparently based on something that you see yourself in accordance with, but then essentially they have this other aspect that they don't tell you, like this it was, I don't know, black and white propaganda, I think he mentioned it, like that you have this covert and overt, right? Like type of propaganda. This was a cool part, I think, like we can talk about, like the forming essentially that you are led to believe you are doing something, but the purpose is completely different than what you actually think. All right, like you're part of the propaganda like voluntarily, but some of the other aspect that this propaganda entails are something that you're completely not aware of, and it's the main purpose essentially, like this black propaganda.
Hmm. Well,
I mean,
okay. Are there
yes.
any examples of that, Selma?
I'm not.
Sorry, I put you on the spot. Maybe you wanted to talk about something else. I
Sorry, so I
apologize.
have no, not at all. Sorry, I just wanted to, like, just one point. I have no examples to add, but I was just, does anyone feel that at any point, I mean, when you read propaganda, like you feel I don't know, do you take personal offense? Like you feel like, you're being made to act against your own will. I mean, that kind of offends me, I just feel, I don't know. Again, he also points out that any sense of independence and independence is frowned upon. For the propagandee, you're not someone that's welcome in a society if you have any streak of independence. That's not good, for society. But anyway, but don't you feel offended by this hand of propaganda in encroaching in your personal independence?
No, absolutely,
Yes,
absolutely. I mean,
absolutely.
that's a good point. That's a good point, actually. Sure. There's this commercial that I often cite for this, drink, like soda drink, Schweppes, right? And at least in Europe, they have a guy dressed in a suit, sitting on a leather chair, you know, and like wearing an expensive watch, and the headline goes, this is a drink for men, right? And I like subconsciously I think, well, I'm a man, I should buy this drink as well, even though it is obviously poison water, right? But yeah, that's a good point, Sal. That's a good point, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I have personal examples. Like growing up, you watch these advertisements. Like this selling you cosmetics. There's this tagline by this brand. Because you're worth it. So you, some cosmetic person, you're telling me that I am worth something. Like how? Who are you to tell me what I'm worth? That was personally very offensive to me. I was I mean, it was like wrong way to sell your product. To me anyway. But people went with it because like there's been this thing that's been inceptionated in young girls that they have to, I don't know, for whatever reason, that your self, it's something that you need to sloganeer, as if self-worth is not something that you intuitively know about yourself, but it becomes a slogan, and then you just become a mechanical reciter of this slogan without understanding any meaning or value to what you're saying. And then when you hear these advertisers utter those words, those slogans that you've been inceptionated with, you make the mental synapses. So yeah, I should do that. I should get that. Then I'll feel I'm worth it.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean that's disgusting, to be honest. I never really thought about that too much, but yeah, I get what they're saying.
I like sorry, just because
No
as
need
we
to
are
apologize. Go
speaking,
ahead, Karim.
yeah,
It's
like in relation to this like examples, right, of this, I think that always the person who is like subjected to a specific propaganda, he just sees the overt propaganda, right? And the one who opposes a specific, for example, regime, or the propaganda based on some, exactly like if it was the Soviet propaganda, the black propaganda was viewed by the other side, right? Like usually when you're under the influence of the propaganda, you see just the positive aspect that they want to show you, but the one on the other side sees just the black aspect that they don't want to show you, right? Like it's this duality of perception, right? If you are under the propaganda or if you are outside of the box, essentially, right? So, for example, I think like with feminism, right? So you have this propaganda, that this is your right and you should earn more and you should be independent and you should, but this is what the women see, right? Like that it's empowering, right? On the other hand, like what is the black propaganda? It's probably, we need more people to pay taxes. We, want to destroy families because families are like some basis of, collectiveness that we need to eliminate from people so they don't, get together and discuss things that might be important, right? So you just see or like exactly like with not having kids, and it's a disturbance and all of these things like about eliminating the family, right? It's kind of a propaganda, and people view it as positive thing for their lives, right? Yeah, I'll be much more happy without kids, right? But on the other hand, right, like, what is their purpose? The purpose is for action, not to not to unionize like through family dies or something, right?
I mean, like, that's a point that I was trying to trying to connect this to when we read the stories in the Quran, like in terms of like children, don't kill your children out of fear of poverty, so this fear of poverty in having children as an outcome of having children is that propaganda, this instant, this is that propaganda, or I mean, it doesn't make any sense because um maybe if the propagandee is short-sighted, if you're about, like, for example, if you have a very narrow view of your society or your goals, you would perpetuate this propaganda that you should not have many children because it's economically not viable, and so on. And then, like, 20 years down the line, you realize that, okay, this is not going to work very well in reality, because now we are dealing with with an aging population, and now we have to bring in more immigrants to fill the gap, and so on. So I mean, that's a very badly thought out propaganda, but it's still propaganda nevertheless, right? I mean, this just thinking about an example here, and then basically, I mean, the other example is all of the negative characters in the Quran, like Fir'aun, for example. I'm the one who gives life and takes life, for example. That's also propaganda. I mean, and there were people who were held captive by that propaganda, and they believed it.
And they believed it even across the sea, right? Like that was the most crazy part about it.
Well, I mean, when we talk about propaganda, there's this idea, and Kareem mentioned it, that there's covert and overt propaganda. Um, I guess it depends really on how how attuned people are to it. So for some, a piece of propaganda can be covert or overt, depending on how we view the world. Like here, now I think I've mentioned this before as well. There is this effort to create a national identity in the country, and children like learn from very early on about some very selective um, bits and pieces of history that reinforce certain ideas and ideologies, and that they grow up believing that you know certain things are true, and they don't particularly feel this propaganda because it permeates the whole society. But if you reflect on it, you can clearly see, okay, why am I reading this poem? Why am I learning about this lord, or king, or whatnot? I mean, is there a significance to it? And would it, just when you think about it, and I don't know, it's like most of propaganda today, I believe, is hidden to an extent, because like, it can be obvious, yeah, but I don't think people have the critical thinking skills to see through it, which is ironic because those critical thinking skills are supposedly taught in schools, and yet that most of us don't employ them when it comes to the educational material we are presented with, right?
Yeah, for sure, exactly. But that was the point. Like always, the other side sees it, right? Like, so you need to reach out, to someone with opposing views and see if they are right, essentially, in their criticism of your propaganda.
Right, exactly. Well, okay. I don't want to just hammer on this particular point. Are there any other bits of this part one that you guys found compelling? that is worth discussing, perhaps.
Assalamu alaikum, Brother
Wa
Nail.
alaikum assalam, Shahriar. Welcome.
I'm a bit late. I just woke up. Could you reiterate what has been discussed already? I'm a bit
So, right,
clueless.
yeah, no problem. We're talking about the book written by Jacques Ellul, a propaganda. I think that's the short term for it. And we are on part one, which deals with external characteristics of propaganda. And, we talked about the different elements of it, different aspects, and what really goes into it. There are five different sections of this part, which are the individual and the masses, total propaganda, continuity and duration of propaganda, organization of propaganda, and autopraxy, which is the practical application of it. So that is what we have discussed so far.
Well, just maybe as a last point from me, what I think was cool also, I have it highlighted. On page 20, he writes, what is needed then is continuous agitation produced artificially, even when nothing in the events of the day justifies or arouses excitement. Therefore, continuing propaganda must slowly create a climate first, and then prevent the individual from noticing a particular propaganda operation in contrast to ordinary daily events. So that was like one last bit that I think is pertinent also to understanding of propaganda, how it operates, right?
I have a question for you, Karim. So you live in Central Europe. What can you see about that society that tells you, okay, these are the values they want to instill in the population?
Yeah, the values that they want to instill is called no values.
Oh, okay. Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, Assalamu alaikum, brother.
Wa alaikum salam. Well, go ahead.
Maybe I think really means like they are already beyond the construction of value. So they are practicing the post-propaganda kind of, So you cannot really see that they are creating something now. They are actually over and beyond. But I wanted to add something with regard to feminism and, people acting assumingly out of their will, but practically, if you read propaganda, you find it like it is not actually out of their will. I just want to give an example. I just recently had a friend, someone speaking about her friend, a friend of a friend, and she is being provided by her husband with everything, like everything, literally everything, and she gets something like a salary or something from her husband as well. But she's really pushing to just have her own business, go chasing customers and stuffs and go out. And it feels like that's the way life has to be. And I guess she's assuming she's acting out of her own will. But really, when you go into the narrative and the way the life is now, it is like she's programmed to feel like it is her own choice. But really, it is not her choice because, I just find it very weird, really. But that's how the society is, and people are running like bots. And it's all about propaganda, I guess. The way we are being programmed by media and whatever, and policies and so many things that we consume. I just wanted to add that.
So, despite the fact that she has a comfortable life, she goes out of her way to essentially suffer because that's the lifestyle
Yeah,
presented to her
because
in the media, right?
yeah, because that's what now defines as a superwoman. You kind working lots of jobs and you have these businesses, you have that, you have, lots of things. But again, it's like it's very sad because they are doing that at the expenses of their children, because now you have to have people looking after your children. You're not going to look after your children. And it looks like because that's the fashion, I mean, that's how people live now. It is taken like an ideal thing. And it's very sad, to be honest, really.
Absolutely.
May I add to that? It's like an imposed
Go
sense
ahead,
of
bro.
inadequacy, let's say. Brother Shahid mentioned this on a different context, of course, but it's an imposed sense of inadequacy, like you're not good enough, even though like life may be good. You need to do something because they make you feel you're not good enough. So it goes much deeper, propaganda, as you said.
Yeah,
Yes,
you need to have a certain lifestyle, don't you?
yeah, yeah, and the weird part is she's a Muslim, and I mean a Muslim, like a Muslim who prays. And again, it's like, again, I think someone said about people fearing about and for the future. Her argument was, if you fail like a husband, you fail, maybe you fall sick, whatever, or you're gone, like you're dead. What am I going to do? Like, you can control the future from now, something like, I don't know, but it's just been very deeply imposed, I mean, in my society, and everyone is living by, like, in a caution mode. Like, everyone has to have, I don't know, like plan B or something. That's the way, I mean, the life has been, portrayed from movies, from media, from everywhere, and from this, women kind of, empowerment, and it is actually very, very sad.
Do you think that's one of the reasons why um, people buy insurance? Because they want to have plan B and C?
No, again, when it comes to insurance, that I think it's another thing, because again, it's a law, it's something prescribed by law. You cannot choose
No,
whether
but I
to have
mean,
some kind of
you
insurance.
can actually have those plans that are not obligatory.
Yeah, like life insurance, yes,
Right.
like life insurance, or like liabilities kind of insurance. Yeah, there are those kind of insurances. But again, I just find it very weird, to like assume you can fetch a very far future and save yourself from, misery that you cannot even perceive like deeply. But I think it is a sense of whatever the community and societies we are living in, again, the West influence and stuff.
Yeah, I believe it it is designed to make you to take action, to spend money, to have a certain lifestyle, right? So I definitely understand where you're coming from, Al. Yeah.
Yeah, and being like in constant worry, like you're worrying for even something you cannot, in reality, you cannot even control. That sense of worry, because that's what keeps people chasing whatever they are chasing. Because you're constantly assuming like something terrible is going to happen.
Well, I mean, there's a solution to that. If you are anxious, you can buy the pills that make that go away, right? So again, you get to spend some money as well. Okay. Do we have any other insights? Aisha, would
Sometimes
you
we
like
have to
to maybe
understand.
comment on? Sorry?
Oh, let's hear Aisha, inshallah.
Yeah, I just wanted to hear her speak as well because she's been silent for a while. Are you with us, or maybe you don't want to speak? That's fine as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to add like that we essentially need to see the originator of the propaganda as well, not just the instruments, right? Like
Mhm.
who is the source of the everything, right? Like who is the source of this particular propaganda? Like nowadays, yeah, for sure. So we see, for example, political propaganda or something, right? And basically, is it really from the politicians or is there something behind them? Or, with respect to neoliberal propaganda, is that like the society chose this, or is that something, some test we are failing from, a different source of propaganda? Or like where is it coming from, right?
It's the Freemasons, I think, the Illuminati.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's the Jews.
Right. Nisa, would you like to say something as well? You've also been silent for a
Yeah,
while.
Nisa wants to speak, I think.
Yeah,
Nisa has
I
been,
do believe
excited
that.
to say something.
Okay, she doesn't want to speak. That's fine. That's fine. I mean, I don't want to force people to speak. That's okay. That's okay. Well, I guess we can wrap it up for today, because I think we've covered everything there is to be covered. I mean, I tend to limit myself to like 90 minutes, um, because that's pretty much how much time I have on a Sunday. But if we finish early, we finish early. That's no biggie. So for next week, we can prepare part two, which is a part of the same chapter, really. Let me see what it is. It is called internal characteristics, right? And it is our meeting is going to be at the same time, um, the same hour rather. So yeah, I guess we can wrap it up for today. Thank you for coming, and enjoy the rest of your weekend if you have it. If not, have a great Monday.
You too, inshallah. Thank you.
Take care.
Jazakallah khair, Nail. Thank you
Thank you.
for
You're welcome. You're welcome, everybody. Take care. Goodbye.